to really think about what is our goal of this conversation. Is my goal to prove how right I am? Is my goal to make the other person feel insignificant? Is my goal to have some sort of power over the other person? Or is my goal truly to understand what that other person's experience is, which is empathy, right? Trying to understand someone else's experience regardless of what our own experience is.
So we're officially less than a year away from the 2020 presidential election, and politics are on the forefront of a lot of people's mind right now. So tonight we're going to unpack the human psychology that drives some of our political processes and decisions. This is Dr. Diana Direiter, and she's going to be our speaker this evening. She's a licensed clinical psychologist and associate professor of psychology at Lesley University, where she's the dean of faculty. Dr. Direiter works to help students find and understand the connections between the real world and the academic world, and often analyzes stories from the worlds of celebrities and pop culture to recognize the threads relevant to what they are learning in their classes. Dr. Direiter's academic and research interests include trauma, rape culture, women's leadership, and the depiction of gender in pop culture. She's fascinated by the messages we all begin receiving from society from our first moments, and how those messages, especially those related to gender, shape our views of ourselves and each other. So with that, please welcome Dr. Diana Direiter.
Hello. I'm really happy to be here. I was so happy to be invited and be able to talk about something that has been on my mind a lot. So got to make a quick change to this. It's actually all I really need to know about politics. I learned in middle school, and just a quick note that there are 348 days until the election. So it is going to be here, holy moly, before you know it. So what I'm going to be talking about tonight is probably not going to be anything brand new to you. So I'm a clinical psychologist, and one way to think about psychology is that it gives words and language to human experiences, right? So it's not that I'm going to be talking about things that are so revolutionary that you've never heard of them. I might be giving some words to things that you've already experienced and you didn't know it was a thing on its own, right? So when I first started getting ready for this evening, I had a plan, and I was going to go to my very serious book of very important theorists, and I was going to bring out all of the most important theorists to talk about them in a very serious way. And we were going, it was a psychology, sociology, and gender studies edition of the very important serious book. And we were going to talk about Abraham Maslow, the hierarchy of needs, Solomon Asch, power of conformity. Some of these names may or may not be familiar to you. Robert Cialdini talks about influence. Leon Festinger, one of my favorites, theory of cognitive dissonance. Kimberly Williams Crenshaw, critical race theory and intersectionality. Lee Ross, who talks about fundamental attribution error and hostile media effect. Shmendam Nadzaku, who talked about the intersection of xenophobia and metathesiophobia, which is the fear of change, which is what we all have to some degree. We were going to talk about Judith Butler and her theory of gender performativity. And then we have a handful of folks that talk about confirmation bias in their work. I was thinking about all of them, and then I decided, or realized, I should say, that really who I wanted to talk about was Thomas J. Stovall. And I'm going to guess that no one here has heard of Thomas J. Stovall. I don't even know what he did. He might have been a judge or a cop or something. But the reason that he's relevant to me is that that was the name of my junior high. Thomas J. Stovall, which is now middle school, but we used to be a junior high. And it is in Houston, Texas. And here I am, not looking awkward at all in middle school or junior high. Not smiling because I had braces and looking oh so cool. Maybe not so much. All right, so I was thinking about this intersection that Gina just referenced of where does psychology and politics, where do they meet up? And again, putting this together, I realized that there's no one symbol that captures politics. And so I decided just to go with our two main political parties. So I realize there are other kinds of politics and other kinds of governments, but this is just to kind of capture the conversation. When I was thinking about different things that politics cover, So it covers a lot, right? So through politics, really it's about the relationship that we build with others so that we can create alliances with like-minded individuals, and so that we can work against people who have different ways of thinking about things, right? So we've got seeking allies, we've got, bless you, distribution of power, defending our territory, deciding the rules, strategizing to use our resources and to best allocate our resources, how to use our influence to make sure that others kind of come on board with us. And as I kept thinking about this, I thought, this sounds familiar. Why do I feel like I have gone through this? And I realized that it really does capture a lot of the middle school experience. And there's also not a one symbol that captures middle school, so I decided to capture it with X and clearasil. So that will be our symbol for that. And thinking about it through this lens, it really makes a lot of, at least to me, a lot of sense of where these intersections are. All right. So I'm going to go through the things that I learned in there. And the first thing that I learned when I went to middle school is you should join a club, right? Don't go it alone. Find a team, find a club, find some group to join you, or that you can join, so that you're not completely on your own in there. Now, I do work in trauma, and so I have become accustomed to thinking about things that are very commonplace to me, might be upsetting to other people. So this next picture may be upsetting to you, so just try and push through. All right, so this is a cafeteria. It's a school cafeteria, right? An empty school cafeteria. Rough times out there, right? If I can just ask quickly, what are some thoughts that come to mind looking at an empty school cafeteria with the chairs that are built in and the tables?
It's empty.
It's empty, absolutely. What is it like when it's full?
There's people.
There are people there. What's it like to go through with all the people there? Anxious, right? So you're walking through, you're carrying your tray of probably tater tots and hamburger-ish, right? And you're keeping an eye out for where your friends are. You're hoping that none of them are out sick that day. You're looking for friendly faces that it's not a clique that you're not a part of. It's not someone who's going to be mean or bully you. You're looking for some way in. You're looking for a connection. And I think that this really captures the essence of why it's important to be part of something larger than yourself. Both in politics and in middle school. So we are going to touch on Abraham Maslow's theory of hierarchy of needs just a bit. Are folks familiar at all with this model? So most everybody has probably seen some variation of the pyramid, where the idea is that we need to meet our most base and basic needs before we can meet our higher level needs. So we start with physiological, work our way up. And the one that we're talking about right now is kind of in the middle there, where we are looking for belongingness. We're looking to connect. And this desire to connect is something that is so primal to us, and it is so important to us that when we don't have it, when it's taken away from us, our bodies actually react in the same way that our body reacts to physical pain, right? So the idea of being ostracized or alone truly creates a physical effect on our bodies. That's how important it is. We need this affiliation for survival, right? Our human infants cannot, they can't survive on their own, obviously. So this is something that is that comes to us really early on and stays with us throughout our life. All right, so we have joined a club. So now we need to show our team spirit, right? We need to let people know what club we are in. I can't remember what I have next. So one thing that we do is we dress like the rest of our team, right? We have particular uniforms sometimes, particular hand signals or signs, different things that show what group we're a part of. And those signs, the idea of being connected to others and having an outward sense of that and showing others, it's disconnected from the type of group that we are. So the folks that we have on the left there, are Boy Scouts. The ones on the right are neo-Nazis, right? They're pretty different groups, and yet the commonality is that even though their values may be completely different, their desire to let the outside world know what their internal values or beliefs are remains the same. It can be pretty uncomfortable if we're the only one who is different, right, or who is wearing something different, when we realize that we are surrounded by other like-minded folks who are like-minded together, and we're the outlier. This was really highlighted, if any of you have seen Mean Girls, right, the Lindsay Lohan, Tina Fey movie from quite a handful of years ago, and it's prompted and spawned several memes. One of them is on Wednesdays we wear pink, right, and this again really captures the idea that if you're going to be part of us, then you need to know the clothing rules, you need to know what days of the week we wear certain colors. And so sometimes we dress the way a larger group does, and sometimes we just want to dress the same as a friend. All right. So we have different things. We have flags and songs and anthems and all of these different things that again give an outward sign of our connection to others. All right. Next lesson that we learn in middle school is ignore information that you don't like. You don't like it? Don't pay attention to it. Middle schoolers are really good at ignoring parents and all of the wonderful information and advice that parents have to give. And the facts are not so important to the middle schoolers, right? The middle schooler will say, all of my other friends get to watch any R-rated movie they want. You talk to some of the other parents and realize, yeah, not so much. And you bring that back to your child and say, yeah, not so much. And they say, well, it doesn't matter because, you just don't understand. Okay. No other kid in my class has a bedtime as early as I do, right? So get that information. Our kids really staying up till 3 o'clock in the morning in middle school. Talk to some of the other families. No, it turns out everybody has a bedtime. You bring that to your kid. I said, well, whatever, right? The facts aren't important. We are very able and very adept at middle school and in adulthood to dismiss anything that we just don't want to know, right? Information that makes us uncomfortable, or information that we don't agree with, or information that challenges our worldview in any way, or information that makes us see ourselves as anything other than the good guy. And we really do need a non-gendered way of saying this. There's not a way that captures it quite as well as good guy, although I don't like using gendered terms. But everyone is the hero or heroine of their own story. No one identifies as the bad guy. And if we get too much information that is going to challenge us and make us think that maybe our motives aren't so pure, maybe we weren't so justified in that decision, maybe the other side does have a point, maybe there is some middle ground, it becomes very uncomfortable, right? So we reject it, and sometimes we just flat out avoid it. And sometimes we will not pay attention to it, or we will dismiss it as incorrect, or it was faulty research, different things like that, right? Okay. The other thing that is related to this is we have, some of us more than others, have a very deep-seated need to be right? We want to be right. And it's not even so much that we want to be right, it's that we really need to be right. It's actually addictive to be right, because every time that we are right, we get a little dopamine hit. And that is how addiction is reinforced neurologically. And so every time we're right, we've got a little thing in our brain that lights up and says, "Oh, that was good, right? Let's be right again." And we keep craving that. This is part of why when we're in the shower, we have arguments with imaginary people, right? When we are completely right and we think of the exact thing to say to the person who may or may not know that they're arguing with you in the shower. And this perpetuates itself, right? So the more we are right, or the more we convince ourselves that we are right, is really more accurate. See, it's righter. the more we need that, and then this is where we start siloing ourselves, and we divide up more into more distinct camps, where we in a lot of ways villainize whoever the other is, right? Okay. Let's see. Another way that this idea of dismissing information that we don't like or makes us uncomfortable is when we think about our own behavior and compare it to others, right? So I may have changed my opinion or my behavior, and I can say it's because I am clearly a flexible and mature thinker, and I've been able to critically analyze and integrate information into my worldview. I've evaluated what it means, and I've come to realize that it's really important to be flexible in thought, right? But you change your opinion or your behavior, and I think, flip-flop, hypocrite, look at that, said one thing, did something different, right? Without taking into account whatever your process or whoever's process was at play. And part of this is because I know my process. I know everything that went through my head. I know everything that I weighed or didn't weigh as I came to a different conclusion and decided to do things differently or the same, or completely rethink my position on something. I don't know that about everyone else, and so I dismiss that as if it's not true, right? So this is called fundamental attribution theory. It's the idea that when I am doing something, I'm very aware of the situation and the circumstances that have led me to that moment. You, whoever the you is, if you're doing something, I assume that that's just the way you are, right? It has nothing to do with the situation, the context, the day that you're having, the opinions that you used to have or have currently. It's just part of your core trait. Right. And so this is, taking this back to politics, this is where we end up with very, again, distinct sides and silos, because if we can't understand and have some degree of empathy for the other side to recognize they may have grown and changed and evaluated and integrated just like I did, it doesn't give a lot of room for a middle ground there. One other thing in this category is the difference between logic and emotion and values. And those seem like they should line up, but they quite often don't, right? So again, going back to this idea of that we may get true information and we will very easily dismiss it because it doesn't fit with our emotional narrative, right? So we've got Jaws, sharks, right? And every year we hear the shark stories, and they're true, right? I'm not doubting them. But do you know what is more likely to kill you than a shark? Fireworks and cows, right? So most of us don't give a lot of thought to fireworks in terms of that we might die that night. And I really don't know anybody who gives a lot of thoughts to the homicidal, murderous cows that are apparently roaming around in gangs. Right, so we don't factor this in, even though, and now y'all know it, right? I know it, and now y'all know it. I'm going to guess that you're probably still not going to be too worried if you drive past a cow, right? Is he chasing us? No, right? You're relatively safe there. But sharks, granted, they have music that lets us know when they're coming, and that probably helps quite a bit because the anticipation builds. But most of us are still going to be convinced that we are more likely to be bitten by a shark than by a cow, even though it's not the case at all. All right, another one from middle school. Image counts, right? It matters how you look or how other people think about you. Again, disconnected from the truth of the actual, of reality. And looks count too, to some degree. So when we think about image, we really like what's familiar. We as humans, we like what's familiar. And this is where it pulls us into some areas that may feel a little disconnected. And again, this is also where we make those leaps in our mind. So I know there are lots of reasons that we haven't had a woman president of the United States. some of the theories suggest that one of the reasons is because, and this is kind of a circular logic I recognize, but we've never had one before, so we can't imagine what it would be like. And so when we picture a leader, when we picture a president, we have 44 rounds of someone who wasn't a woman that we pull up as part of our heuristic, right? Our shortcut of what does a president look like? Oh, it looks like a guy, right? And for the most part, it looks like a white guy. Now we've got a little bit more diversity and variety there. But interesting to me, when Barack Obama was elected, there were generations of folks who were very emotional and very moved, and you know, people that said, I never thought I would see this in my lifetime, that this is amazing. And then we had a bunch of teenagers that said, yeah, guess we got a new president. Cool, okay, whatever. Right, and again, part of the theory of that is that, well, one, these teenagers had not seen a whole lot of presidents yet, right? So their heuristic was not particularly deep to reflect on. And also, there were African American presidents on TV, fictional, obviously, but it wasn't something that was brand new to them. So it didn't seem like as big a shift for them. The other thing that happens with image is that if someone has a pretty good image, if there are some characteristics that they have that we think are positive, we are more likely to think that they're going to have lots of other positive characteristics as well. It's called a halo effect. So if we think that someone is good in this area, we're going to assume that they're good in lots of other areas. And one quick thing on the looks and the body of a president. We tend to vote for the tallest person running. It doesn't make a lot of sense, right? I don't know that the White House has a whole lot of high shelves that no one else would be able to access. But more often than not, we vote for the tallest person who is running, which again makes no sense, but it fits into our idea of someone who is big and powerful and able to protect us or defend us or whatever else that we're expecting the president to do. Someone's image can change pretty quickly, bringing this to TV, which I love to think about TV, and the ways that it's changed us and shapes our world. In the 60s, when this became a pretty pivotal moment in politics, in which the presidential debate was first televised, right? And we had John F. Kennedy, who was young and fit and handsome and healthy looking, and everyone could see him. And then we had Richard Nixon, who was kind of sweaty and kind of pale and kind of nervous and did not do so well, right? So once we had this visual medium to be able to evaluate them on, it really changed the way we think about what a leader looks like as opposed to what a leader sounds like. And lots of other folks who have gone up have had their image change, sometimes not necessarily based on reality, right? We had Sarah Palin, who was parodied by Tina Fey, and popularized the idea of I can see my house from here, or Russia from my porch. And she became, it shifted from however we saw her before, and she became a very silly figure to a lot of us, right? Because her image became someone who's just kind of foolish. We had Michael Dukakis several years ago, right? That he had this attempt to show how tough he was, and it really backfired because again we saw him as being kind of silly and out of touch and foolish, and this image was used very much against his original desires. A president or a leader we wonder if they're self-deprecating, right? We look for these moments. Is that their image, that they're an aw shucks kind of person, right? Or is it someone who's really cool and does things that at that point hadn't been done before, like going on late night TV shows, which now is a staple, right? But at one point it wasn't. There was a point that it had to begin. And so essentially we're evaluating whether these folks who are running in political circles, are they one of us, right? Can we see ourselves in who they are, or can we not? All right, here's another biggie, and I'm aware of the time, so I'm going to go a little bit quickly on some of this. One thing that we learned in middle school is girls and boys aren't treated the same. And this is, of course, using the binary. Once we introduce non-binary and transgender, there's a whole other range of experiences and identities that are not treated equally at all. But just thinking about the binary for the moment, girls and boys are treated differently. And one of the saddest, there are two of the saddest things that I know, and lucky for y'all, I'm going to tell you both of them tonight. The first one is that girls' self-esteem in America peaks at 9 years old. It peaks at 9 years old, and then it goes downhill after that. And shortly after being 9 years old, we're in middle school, right? So it's right around this time that girls and individuals who present as girls are given these messages that they are less than, right? That they are less worthy, that they are less valuable, that they're less capable. And some of the pictures that I'm going to show next are from current events, but it's certainly not limited to just the current events, right? And girls are socialized pretty early on to understand that they are not supposed to show strong emotions, right? Girls and women are socialized to not be angry, even if they have something to be angry about, right? We become shrill, we become nags, we become shrews when we're angry. Heaven forbid we introduce race and intersectionality into that, right? And then you end up with all sorts of other identities. But you know, this past year we had some really clear examples of men who are able, and again, these are examples, right? Men who are able to show strong emotion. And it's not that boys get off easy on this, because boys they're also socialized not to have their whole range of experiences and emotions, right? So there are lots of emotions that society says are not for them. But anger is not one of them. They're really encouraged to voice and to show their anger, and that happens really early on. Boys are also encouraged to use their bodies differently than girls are, even staying completely away from the sexualization of girls and kids. Just thinking about the way that boys are encouraged to use their bodies to give a message of intimidation or authority. And again, this is just a really clear example of that with the presidential campaigns from 2016, right? Boys and later men are also encouraged to use their voices differently than girls are. So this is Sue Montgomery. She is a mayor in a small town in Canada, and she was running city council meetings, and she started knitting, and she decided to knit with red yarn every time that a man was, or someone who was presenting as a man was speaking, and knitting with green yarn every time that someone presenting as a woman was speaking. And you can see a bit that it's a fairly red scarf, right? By her estimation, it's about 80% red and about 20% green. And the literature holds this up, right? So again, in middle school, the girls are learning that their voices don't count for as much. And this is not just in small towns in Canada. We see women who are interrupted much more often than men, and men tend to interrupt women more than they interrupt other men. We even see this on the Supreme Court, again bringing this back to politics, that when we look at, there's a study that looked at all of the verbal interactions over, I think it was 13 years, and just looking at the most recent, configuration, the 3 women justices were interrupted 3 times as often as all of the other men combined, right? So even in, I gave Clarence Thomas a smaller bubble because he famously doesn't say much, so I gave him just a little one. But these male voices tend to drown out the women's voices for lots of reasons. All right, quickly, areas in which women politicians are evaluated or discussed differently than men. Again, bringing this back to the idea of performativity. Judith Butler, who said that there's not really a real thing such as gender, right? That our ideas of being a woman or a man are really based on our own construction of that. And that we're basing it on how we perform in the world, and how others treat us, and what expectations they have of us. So these are some of the different areas that we as a society judge women candidates differently than men candidates. Right? Sexual history, likability, clothing, expression of emotions, quality of parenting, their body, their hair, their age, their voice, their sex appeal. And there's also one more that you might see this one coming. Did she smile enough? Right? Did she smile enough? Which is not something that we evaluate in our male candidates. So that's a big one. All right, so let's moving on. All right. Next category is suck it up, buttercup, which means that there are some things that we have to accept in order to get other things, right? So if we look at the two basic parties that we have, we've got difference in our opinions of reproductive rights, of immigration, of the role of government, of gun control. And within each party, we have to make decisions about what are the priorities that we're going to go after and which ones are we going to let go. And then across the aisle, we have different compromises and trade-offs that we have to make to be able to move forward. Right? So again, we learned this in middle school, that there are things that we can do, but you got to do something else first, right? You can watch TV, but you have to clean your room first. You can go to the mall, but you have to bring your sister with you, right? So these compromises and give and take that play out in lots of ways. All right, so this is, I told you what the first saddest thing that I know is, which is that girls' self-esteem peaks at 9. This is the other saddest thing that I know. Group projects are never over. You will have group projects for the rest of your life. I am so sorry, but it's true, because going back to the idea that we need to connect and belong, there aren't a lot of fields where we can affect change just as one person. Generally speaking, we have to connect with others. We have to work with others. We have to find ways of allying with others. And so what we want to do in those moments is we want to learn as early as possible, figure out how we can get people on board with our ideas, right? So that we're not doing someone else's idea. And so this is where, going back to Maslow for a moment, we want the ideas that we have to stick with people. And so politically, we come up with slogans, and a lot of them correlate with the different levels of phases of need, right? So they meet different needs. We've got 4 more years of the full dinner pail, chicken in every pot. These are the physiological needs, and these are all political slogans. Speak softly, carry a big stick. He has kept us out of war. There's Wilson, so encouraging us to think about safety as we're debating who to vote for. Stronger together, right? So this is kind of an in-between of the safety and the belongingness. So stronger together, Hillary Clinton. We're only getting stronger together, Donald Trump, a little bit later. So again, capturing that same idea. America First. This was in reaction to people's distrust of immigrants after World War I. On your side, Michael Dukakis. Let's Make America Great Again, originally attributed or affiliated with Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton. And of course, Make America Great Again is now very much associated with again, Donald Trump. And then as we work our way up the level of need, we've got A Future to Believe in, right? Thinking about the future, forward generativity, how things will be down the road, self-actualizing, where we will become our best selves, right? And Obama with Yes We Can. So this brings us close to the end as we start to wind our way down here. So these are the different lessons that we talked about today, that we learned in middle school, and wouldn't you know it, come to find out that they did connect with the big important book of serious theorists. So we've got the Maslow hierarchy of needs, power of conformity, cognitive dissonance, the fundamental attribution error. What is this one? The gender performativity, confirmation bias, the idea that we are more likely to believe things that we already believe anyway. We've got critical race and intersectionality by Crenshaw, thinking about girls and boys and intersectionality there. We've got Nadzuka thinking about xenophobia and how we see the other. And we have Robert Cialdini thinking about the ways that we try to influence others, right? So thank you so much for your attention. We'll end on this. If anyone has questions or comments or would like to reach me, I'm reachable at direiter@leslie.edu. Had to put Stovall in there since that was also part of the inspiration. So thank you, everybody. Yay. Whirlwind.
So now we're going to open it up for questions. If anyone has any questions, raise your hand. I'll pass the mic to you, and then you can ask.
Okay, so one question I have is this. If we're going to talk about psychology and politics, why is it that so many people seem to get very offended by the hat that I'm wearing and tend to get violent for absolutely no reason, even if I pose no physical threat whatsoever?
So going back to the symbols, right, that as people divide up into their tribes or camps and they look for those that are familiar and like-minded, the other side of that is pushing away those that are not, right? So we seek the familiar, we reject the unfamiliar or the uncomfortable. So so my guess is that people are responding to the values that they identify with the cap, not more than the cap itself. That's my guess.
Well, as someone who actually wears this cap, I believe it just sends a very positive message that brings all of America together. Therefore, I see no reason for people to get violent just because I believe in America first. I believe in making America great again. And I believe that President Trump is doing a wonderful job in office, actually taking care of all American citizens.
Yeah, and isn't it great that everybody gets to have, that's one of the things that makes this a very special place to live, right? That everybody can have their opinions and come together or find the folks that agree with them and voice their opinions. I love it. Okay.
Do you have any other comments you wanted to make about or in response to that question?
Well, I think it just highlights when we think about how far we can be apart in some of these different camps that we have a lot of folks who are really unable to have the conversation about the beliefs or where the beliefs are stemming from. And you're right, we have incidents of violence and attacks, and whether it's attacks on character or physical attacks, that are probably not leading any of us in the direction that we think is a collaborative one.
Regarding cognitive dissonance or just ignoring facts, I guess what would you recommend for like anyone like on an individual level to like kind of recognize that in yourself, I guess, and to work against it maybe?
So I know that that what some folks do, particularly around the political issues, is to make themselves watch news or read newspapers on channels or types of newspapers that are not the ones that they would usually agree with, right? So that they can really challenge themselves to think about what other perspective is being provided. And it's really hard to make yourself uncomfortable on purpose, right? And so of course all of us we tend to shy away from that. But I've heard I haven't gotten myself to do that, right? But I've heard that that's a really good technique to be able to challenge your own confirmation bias of deliberately putting yourself in the area that's going to make you most uncomfortable.
So in the context of like having these political conversations, and I guess my question is like, when you're having political conversations, like how do you have a constructive conversation or debate rather than going into something, if you're trying to, make yourself uncomfortable on purpose or challenge yourself, but how do you not kind of double down on the things that you already believe and try to validate that? Yeah,
no, I think that's a great question because, again, going back to the idea of that we love being right, that I think at times we need to really think about what is our goal of this conversation. Is my goal to prove how right I am? Is my goal to make the other person feel insignificant? Is my goal to have some sort of power over the other person? Or is my goal truly to understand what that other person's experience is, which is empathy, right? Trying to understand someone else's experience regardless of what our own experience is. And so I think having those pre-conversations and even setting ground rules when it's, we're going into Thanksgiving. Some folks may be heading to families that might have different ways of thinking about things, different worldviews, and you have that moments of deciding, am I going to have this debate? Is this a real debate, or are we just making everybody uncomfortable? And so when it is a real debate and a real exchange of ideas, I think that's the time to set the ground rules, because it's going to be that you're coming from opposite sides, and that it could lead to discomfort or even inappropriateness, right? And so to talk about those things before the conversation starts, I think is probably a better way than diving into it and then waiting until everyone is up here and then saying, what we should do is, yeah.
Great, then let's give our speaker a round of applause. Thank you again for being here, Diana.
Thank you so much.